The level of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere is now at its highest level ever. Measurements taken at a monitoring station in Hawaii show that there are now 400 parts of CO2 per million. Earlier, I spoke with Bob Deans from the Natural Resources Defense Council. I asked him what this means and what kind of impact it will have on our climate.
It means that we have more carbon pollution in our atmosphere now than at any time in the history of humankind. We have more carbon now in our atmosphere than we have at any time in 3 million years at least. And so this carbon is coming from the fossil fuels that we're burning, coal, gas, and oil, and it is causing climate chaos around the world. Arctic ice is melting. Deserts are widening. We're getting extreme weather events, more drought, more hurricanes, more typhoons, more extreme heat waves. This kind of climate chaos came home to roost in our country just last year. We had the hottest year on record in 2012.
Right, and we know that carbon dioxide is one of the main drivers of this increase in temperature, the so-called greenhouse effect.
Absolutely. Carbon dioxide, the more you have in the atmosphere, the more it warms the planet. And at 400 parts per million, we're in new territory. We've never been here before. Before the Industrial Revolution, Anand, we had range between 180 and 280 parts per million. There were some varying fluctuations in that range. So now here we are about almost 50% above that level. And it's a consequence of all this oil, gas, and coal that we're burning. And we have to get a handle on this. It's threatening our future.
Okay, let me try and put that figure into some kind of context. This was a reading taken at a ground station in Hawaii.
Right.
It was not the first time in recent years that we've seen 400. 400 has been recorded in the Arctic at one time. But does it also mean that the average atmosphere throughout the world will now see this rise?
That's right, because if you look at the Arctic, there's very little growth up there, foliage, trees, plants pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So for it to have hit that level in the Arctic, not all that surprising. For it to be this way in Mauna Loa, which is about the purest air we can get, it's right sitting there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far from any kind of industry. It's shocking, it's disturbing. Scientists tell us, Anand, that 350 parts per million is about as high as we can go without seeing climate change continue to get worse and worse. Now what we're looking at, when we say 400 parts per million now, we're looking at the possibility of going to maybe 450 parts per million and maybe even higher before we can get a grip on this. We've got to do better.
Now, you say we've got to do better. What is being done to counteract this?
Well, I think we've tried to look at some global solutions to this because it is a global problem. We've tried the United Nations. But I think what we're recognizing is that countries are different, economies are different. We're going to have to try to find the solutions that work in each country, but we're going to have to cooperate globally. And certainly no two countries need to cooperate more than the United States and China. We're the largest emitters. We also are the largest economists. We have more resources. We have the technology. We have a long-standing partnership that we can work together on this. We can get this job done. I don't think anybody else can. The United States and China have to work together. What we need to do in the United States are three things. Number one, we need to set limits on the single greatest source of carbon emissions in this country. That's our power plants. The coal-fired power plants in this country that produce electricity account for 40% of our carbon footprint. The Clean Air Act gives President Obama the authority and the responsibility to set limits on that carbon, and we need to do that. Number two, we need to stop doing things that make matters worse. That means we need to say no to the Keystone XL pipeline. After all, this would bring some of the dirtiest, most carbon-intensive fuel on the planet right through the heartland of America, through our breadbasket, so it can be shipped out through New Orleans, ports down there along the Gulf of Mexico. It's not a good idea. We need to say no to that. It would have a terrible impact on our climate. So that's number two. Number three, we have to continue to invest in efficiency so we can do more with less, and in wind, solar, and other renewable fuels so that we can at last begin to move away from this costly addiction to fossil fuels.
So, very comprehensive solutions being looked at there. Bob Deans, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.